I'm Bea.
And I'm Sam.
And we're two best friends who like to talk shit about smut, wingspan,
and sometimes books.
Join us every Wednesday for a new episode.
Hello everyone, welcome to episode 29 of A Pod of Smut and Wingspan. As promised, this week we're bringing you another episode that's a bit more fun, and not that the others aren't fun, but just not a book dedicated episode. So as we mentioned, because you've had so many weeks of doing book after book after book, we wanted to have a couple now that sort of broke up that pattern. So last week we did our Wingspan comparison to our Wingspan draft episode, and we had so much fun recording that, and we really hope that you enjoyed it too. So this week, as promised, it's another funnish episode, and we sat down with the girls over at Bookish Babes After Dark podcast, and they sat down with us to talk all things Bookish Origins. So in this episode, all of us talk about the books that sort of made us, I guess, as readers, the books that we loved as children, the books that sort of changed us, even books nowadays that we feel became part of us after reading them. So we really hope you enjoy this week's episode, and we'll join you again next week for another fun episode, I guess.
What number is it for us?
29.
I was going to say, is it 30, but it's not, is it? It's 29?
No,
okay.
29.
Okay.
Hello, I am Eleanor. I'm actually Ellie, but for the podcast, we've had to call me Eleanor and Ellie, because Ellie doesn't have a long version of her name. So I feel like I always get called Eleanor, and I'm like, what have I done now? Because my mum only ever calls me Eleanor. But yeah, so I am 1/3 of Bookish Babes After Dark. Unfortunately, Jord is ill, so she's not been able to join us today. But yeah, so we all live in Manchester-ish, sort of. We're all from that area, and yeah, we started our podcast in April this year, so April 2024. And we mainly read dark romance, or we mainly review dark romance on our podcast. But I like all kinds of genres. I like fluffy romance, I like dark romance, fantasy, thriller, even historical fiction. But yeah, we mainly stick to dark romance because that's what we all have in common. So yeah, and then like I say, I think we're on 23, we call them chapters, episodes, whatever we want to call them. But yeah, we're relatively new. We kind of just fly off the seat of our pants and just hope for the best. And I think it's kind of all right.
Yeah, I think we're doing all right.
That's me in a kind of brief intro of our podcast. So
yeah, I'm Ellie, so I'm the second one. It was sort of like the podcast started as a bit of a fever dream. It was, I put a message into the group chat, and then sort of within a week we had microphones and we had socials set up, and it was like, oh, this is actually happening type thing. Yeah, I've only really gotten into reading over the last back into reading, should I say, in like the last 2-3 years. And sort of we all met through TikTok, which is crazy to even think about, but that's sort of where we sort of originated from.
Because when I was doing like my stalking research the other day on all of you, because obviously I did that, when I was reading you guys' like pin profiles on your Instagram, because you've got the little bios about yourselves, and I think it was yours, Ali, I was reading, and it's actually really similar. It's quite similar to my, like, I don't know, Bookish origin, is that what we're calling it, I guess? Because yeah, I think you'd said you'd like not read for like 10 years, and then like just all of a sudden was like, I'm reading again now, and like here you are with a podcast on books.
Yeah.
And that was similar to me. Like I went through 8 years of literally nothing, and then in 2023, so a little bit later, just picked up ACOTAR, and here we are. Here we are. I can't really see it very well, but yeah. Yeah. Whereas Sam, you were the other way around. Like you always read.
Yeah.
But just didn't read fantasy.
Yeah, I think the height of my fantasy was reading Game of Thrones, just because somebody said, oh, you wouldn't be able to read all of those.
And I was like, oh, watch me. I'm going to do it to prove you wrong now. But
I don't know if you can tell, but Sam's a Scorpio. Like, just to know if you can tell from the first, like, 5 minutes of this, but Sam's a Scorpio.
But yeah, I was very much psychological thrillers and, like, fluffy romances. That was pretty much all I read, other than my yearly reread of Harry Potter. I used to read it every year at Christmas. I'd start it again for like the umpteenth time. And I'd always read that at Christmas, and then that would fuel me into the new year because I'd have loads of new books for Christmas, and then I would just smash out every new book that I had. So yeah, I haven't really taken a hiatus from reading for like ever. I've always read. I always had a bookshelf in my bedroom. Even like I can remember being really small and having like all the Jacqueline Wilson books, all the Enid Blyton books. So yeah, I never took a break. But last year B had read ACOTAR and was like, please read this book, please read this book, please read this book. And I was like, if it will shut you up, I will read this book. And now I've read like every trending fantasy book there is, and I'm very much a romantasy girly now, but fantasy was never anything, like, it was never something I would have picked up before.
I'm similar to Ellie and B in that I like read when I was younger, and again I had all the Jacqueline Wilson books, and I still had my bookshelf. In fact, I still think my bookshelf is at my mum's house with some of my books on it, unless she's got rid of them. She might have. And then I probably stopped reading at like 16, and then like I picked up books to go on holiday. Like I had an obsession with Jodie Pickle when I was like early, I'd say like late teens, maybe late teens, but I only ever read them on holiday. And then I picked up a book in 2022 because I just decided that I really wanted to read smut. And I don't know why. I was saying to Ellie earlier, I don't know how to say. I just decided I wanted to read smut, and that's why I came back to reading. But that is the truth. And ever since, my reading's just kind of taken off. But before 2022, I didn't understand what a genre was really. I just read books. Like I didn't understand what a genre was, what a trope was. So like I read Eragon, which is a fantasy, YA fantasy, back when I was a teenager or early teens, and had no idea that it was like a fantasy and like, you know, all these different things. In fact, I recently rebought it because I want to read it again. And yeah, it's just mental to me. And now I've come back into reading, even actually within like maybe the first 6 months, I still had no idea that there was what a trope was. I was like, what the hell is that? And then I had to Google it. It's been like a really steep learning curve of like, oh wow, there's so much to do with books, but I'm not in any way, shape or form one of those people that reads a book and goes, that's some really good, like, you know, writing, really descriptive, like all of this. I just can't. My head's like, I really enjoyed the story, and that's as deep as my reading goes. I just can't. I don't know if something's good, like English or anything like that, because I'm crap at English. So, but yeah, it's like
when it comes to stuff like that, when it comes to sort of like writing styles and stuff like that, I'm hopeless. So I'm dyslexic. So like all the way sort of through school, secondary school, I just sort of got on with it. Got to college, got sort of like told, yeah, no, you are dyslexic, and I noticed that's when I stopped reading, and then sort of. I stopped reading throughout college, didn't really read throughout uni, and then lockdown happened. And I was like, what do I do now? Like, I finished my degree because I was one of the 2020 graduates. So that was fun. It was like, well, what do I do now? Like, we can't go out. We can't do anything. I've watched the entirety of Netflix. What am I going to do? And the book that sort of restarted my reading journey was A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. I absolutely rinsed through it. And I was able to meet Holly Jackson last year.
Oh, wow.
And I said to her, I was like, thank you for breaking my like 10-year reading slump. And she was like, what do you mean you had a 10-year reading slump? And I was like, we don't talk about it. Just please sign my book and then we can have a photo.
Yeah. Side note, you've just made me feel so old by saying you graduated in 2020.
I just thought this as well. I was like, oh my gosh, I was like,
The whole time that you were speaking after that, I just couldn't take it in because I was like, wow, I'm old.
yeah, that made me feel really old. So I was like, I'm not going to say the year that I graduated because. But it's interesting that you both say that because I studied literature in university. Like I loved it, even though I have like phonetic dyslexia, which is a little different to like, you know, normal dyslexia, because I'm fluent Welsh speaker. My first language is Welsh, and I went to Welsh school, but I didn't come from a Welsh speaking family. I know that's a really weird thing, but in Wales it's quite common. So my parents sent me to school at 5 and were like, oh, you go to a school that speaks Welsh now, so you've just got to speak Welsh, which the speaking part was fine for me, but the way you write in Welsh is phonetic as opposed to English. So I've been taught up until 5, right, you write this way, and now it's like, no, you're going to write this way. So then I really struggled with my English spelling and writing because I would spell and write phonetically, because phonetic in your brain makes loads of sense, whereas English spelling and writing does not make any sense. So for a really long time, like I really struggled with my writing, but my reading was always fine, and I loved to read. And in school, like I was really lucky, I had a really good teacher at GCSE who really pushed me, and I actually loved it so much. I did it A level. And then when I was picking degrees, I was like, it's got to be like a literature-based degree. I was going to do English Lit, but the English Lit talk, the lecturer was an absolute arsehole. And I was like, I'm not just going to do English Lit. I did American Studies, which is like a bit of everything, but it's literature. And then I was like, that was what I was going to do. Something, either be an author, like that was what I wanted to do, was like literature. And because I studied like English and writing, it completely took all the joy out of it for me. So you know how you were saying, like, Anna, like, oh, you don't know about like how things are written, you don't know about like themes and stuff. Like it kind of did the other way around to me, because I had to study it for 3 years, and that's all I did. We'd read a book a week per class. So if I was doing 4 or 5 literature classes, it was 4 or 5 books a week, and they weren't always like boring things, but they were like, you know, like the classics, you know, like Of Mice and Men, like John Steinbeck, like those kind of things. And because you literally were having to analyze a book within an inch of its life, I graduated and I was like, I've never enjoyed reading less, because it took all the fun out of it. It took all the enjoyment. Up until that point in my free time, I'd read fantasy, but I didn't even know smut books exist. I know that's a stupid thing to think, but like I never knew smut was a thing in books. And when I picked up ACOTAR, I didn't know. And in the grand scheme now, ACOTAR is not that spicy. Yeah. But you know, when you have no idea that you're going to read sex in a book, when I was reading those scenes, I was literally blushing. I kept having to like hide my Kindle because I was like, oh my gosh, this is so steamy. But yeah, like you said, finding smut in fantasy, or romantasy, I guess is what it's called now, that's what made me enjoy it. Is like, I don't care if what I'm reading isn't considered like technically, I don't care, because doing those type of books just took the fun out of it. Like it's not fun anymore when you read like that.
Yeah. It's a huge thing on TikTok at the moment, isn't it? This whole intellectualism, like book talk. And I don't know much about it because I've not really gone into it. But I just think, yeah, okay, you might be right, because I don't know whether this book is, you know, written well, or whether it's, you know, as it should be. But I know that I enjoyed it. So who cares?
Yeah, you're just there for the vibe, right? Like, I don't care if there's a spelling mistake in. I don't care if there's no sentence structure. Did it make me cry? Yeah, and that's what I want.
Yeah. Exactly.
When we're watching films or watching series, I don't know if they're directed well. I don't know if the script is written well. I don't know anything about cinema. Like, so, you know, you take it at face value. Like, yes, I enjoyed watching that. Like, I enjoyed that story. End of. It doesn't need to be intellectual. Well, not for me anyway.
No. I mean, like, I was a Wattpad girly, so it like does not bother me at all. And like I was also like deep, you know, like the Tumblr smut, when like it was like the height of Tumblr smut and people were writing their own fanfics and everything. I was like knee deep in that sort of era, so I can see now why the majority of the books that I read are smut, or like dark romance, or like erotic horror and that type of thing, just because I just like it. Like, there's no other way to describe it. It's like, I'm here for a good time, not a long time. Just let me enjoy my little smutty books and leave me be. Like,
Yeah, and I think as well, like, and this is getting too much into this TikTok drama, but I'll put my 5 pence in and then we'll go on. But you're referencing onto those people saying like, oh, because it's like women reading smut, and for the most part, like generally in these genres, you know, the romantasy, the dark romance, for the most part, it is very female dominated. And again, not everyone, but the age demographic generally tends to be the same as well. Like, there's very much an audience that it focuses on. Obviously, there's always going to be variation, but for the most part, it's people like us in those genres that are the readers of the target audience, and also the authors as well. But like, I just think men are getting mad because women are writing smut for women, and we much prefer it. Like, nobody wants to read your Andy McNabb, like, men written by women, like war, I don't know what it is, but war thing. I just don't know why they get so mad.
We've read a grand total of 2 books written by a man on this podcast.
I don't think
both of them are
right?
unhinged.
Were they?
It was our paperclip.
Conquered by Clippy.
He was a sentient paperclip.
Which, to be fair, was really funny. I actually really enjoyed it. But
and then the other one was the Tetris blocks. They were sentient Tetris blocks.
Okay, I remember both. I've seen both. I've listened to both those episodes.
Yeah.
But funny enough, we did. I don't know if it was on those episodes or if it was another one afterwards that we all said men can't write smut. They just can't.
My husband is a bit of a reader, not much. He started getting back into it as I have, and he reads like sci-fi pretty much. That's what he reads. He was reading some fucking sci-fi book. I don't know what it was. Something Hyperion. Apparently, I never heard of it. And he was like, "Oh, there's sex in this. Do you want to read it just to see like how you compare?" Oh my god, it was the worst. Like, it was just, if you got AI to write a sex scene from a male perspective with a woman, that's what it was. And he was like, "Did you enjoy that?" I'm like, "Absolutely not. No."
The thing about smut is, I think it's done so well because it's allowing women to be sexual without it feeling as though we are being shamed for it, although we technically are still being shamed for it in a way. But that's why I think I enjoy it so much, and I think that's why I got into it at the age that I did, because I think, how old was I in 2022? I was 28, 27, maybe 28. I finally got into it, and I realised, I was like, I like this, because, in fact, I tell a lie. I did read at uni once, and what I read was 50 Shades of Grey. And I have to say, I stayed up. I read the 3 books in 3 days, and I stayed up to like 4 a.m. to read them all because I was like obsessed, and they made me sob. So Ellie will know I am like literally. I have a.
She's not a crier. She's not an emotion shower.
Yeah. Which is weird because in real life I cry at everything, but when it comes to a book, for some reason I just can't cry. Mm-hmm. But I remember absolutely bawling my eyes out at 50 Shades of Grey, and I was like, this is just the most beautiful thing I've ever read. And then everyone was like, yeah, 50 Shades of Grey shit, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, well, actually, I really enjoyed it. And yes, okay, it was years ago, but it opened up something for me that was completely different. And yes, okay, smut has evolved since then. It's not the most smutty book you'll read. It's not the best read book that you'll ever come across, but it was good. And now we have the delights that are like, for example, we buddy read the other day a book called Ide Fixe by C.J. Riggs. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's dark romance. It's literally like 82 pages, and we literally sat there for like an hour and a half maximum. We were all reading it all at the same pace. If like one of us went a bit like a few pages over, we'd wait for the others to catch up. We were just there on WhatsApp, just messaging each other. And I was like, this is some of the best smut I've ever read in my life. And I don't actually know why it's really that dark, because it's not dark.
I think,
in my opinion, I may be warped.
I think it was the knife play.
Oh yeah, sorry.
But I think at this point, like we've spoken about it on an episode. We did an episode about trigger warnings a couple of weeks ago. I'm like so desensitized to stuff now that like I will always. So I have like no triggers. I have no triggers. I've read some of the most disgusting books that you will ever think of, and been like, yeah, really enjoyed it. That's a 5-star. I had a great time. But when it comes to sort of looking back on the stuff that I'm reading, I'm like, did I really enjoy that? I mean,
Yeah,
I'm sat here.
I should
I'm sat
probably
here
be
with the
more
My Girl
careful.
triggers. I'm sat here with the
Yeah.
My Girl triggers in front of me, and I'm like, I rated that 5 stars.
Because I'm here being like, it fix it. It's fantastic. It's not even dark. Just read it, and then I'm like, oh wait, maybe that is dark to some people. But it's just like, I've never ever read, like, if you took the knife part out of it, then it's just really, really, really well written smut. Like, and I don't know. I just have this big smut shaped hole in my heart whenever I don't read it. So
Same.
I just love it.
But we get like that sometimes, like because I think you've not Sam really read any what's considered dark romance. Like, we've not really read any dark romance. The only books that I have ever read that are dark romance, and I didn't know they were dark romance at the time, I just saw them on Book Talk recommended and read them. I was like, whoa, was the Haunting Adeline, Haunting, don't know how you say it.
Adeline,
Yeah, and would I read a book like that again? Probably, but I don't think that was the best representation of that genre. I don't know how you guys feel about that book. It's a very hot topic debated book in the dark romance world. Having like read more about it now, actually I'm like, yeah, it probably isn't the best representation. But so yeah, for you guys to say like, oh, it's not that dark, it's maybe for like, I don't know, maybe for us who
it would be really dark.
Yeah, we would be like,
because I actually read, I think I was probably one of the few avid dark romance readers that had never read Haunting Adeline. So I've only literally just finished it in the past 2 weeks. I've not read Hunting yet. So I rated it 5 stars, but I didn't rate it 5 stars because of the smut. I rated it 5 stars because I just fell in love with Zaid and his whole, the whole saving trafficked kids, like that just completely tugged at my heartstrings. But I think there is probably better dark romance out there that we've read. But I also just think
I would say I've got my dark romance shrine sort of like up here. I have read that many dark romances now that when it comes to like Haunting and Hunting, it's not the best one that I've read. We did an episode on one that I would say was probably one of the best dark romances I've ever read, and it's That Sick Love by Jessie Hall, and she does some of the best dark romances that you could ever think of, because they are dark and gritty, but they've also got like a decent plot and there's character development alongside it, and it's not just smut for the sake of smut. Like there's an actual sort of like plot and story alongside it, because I read Haunting and Hunting and then I was like, oh, I quite like that. Let's see what else is on Kindle Unlimited. Stumbled upon That Sick Love, dived head first, didn't read the blurb, didn't read the triggers. I just saw the cover and I was like, yeah, that sounds all right. And I've now read that book. Is it 6 times?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
And to be fair, it is my favourite dark romance book in the entire universe. It is excellent. But the thing is, like, you like what you like, and if you don't like it, that's not a problem. And I think people having these opinions that, everyone's got to like the same thing, it's just so wrong. It's like Ellie and George, for example. There are books that they want to read for the podcast that I just won't read, because I tried reading one, and yes, okay, it was very well written in terms of like she would describe things in such a way it was so vivid, which I really liked. However, for me, it was a step too far because it didn't feel like a romance anymore. It just felt like someone doing really nasty things to someone, and I was like, that's not for me. I like a romance element to a book. So these guys will read them, and then they will talk about them on the podcast, and they'll get my reaction to like the really disgusting parts, but I don't have to put myself through reading it because I just know that I wouldn't enjoy it. And does that take away from that book? Does that mean it's a bad book? No, it means that it's just not the right book for me. But people seem to have this opinion that everyone has to like the same thing. So wrong.
Yeah, we did a video the other day about Quicksilver by Carly Hart. Like, we'd both read it and we were just talking about it, and somebody commented on it on TikTok and said, oh, I DNF'd, I couldn't get into it. And I think I replied something like, oh, this is why I love reading, it's so subjective, and like all of us have such different like tastes, and different things speak to different people. And she actually messaged us and she was like, thank you so much for being so kind about me DNFing a book, because I've had so much hate for saying when I've DNF'd a book that I get scared now to say on social media that I've DNF'd anything. And I was just like, who has decided like this hierarchy of like who's allowed to say what your opinion of a book should be?
Yeah, it's like when it came to the Powerless books, when we did those, like they are in our, like in the romantasy genre, they are like so highly recommended, like people love them. They're a bit more YA, but like people eat them up. And we just didn't, we still want to like this series. We're holding out hope, but we've done the 2 main books and the novella now, and every episode we say it doesn't mean that it's a bad book. There's bajillions of people out there that are buying Lauren Roberts books. She's making millions, like good for her. Like, and we like, look, she's got our money. How many versions of Reckless did I buy? About 15 of them. All the sprayed edge versions. But like it's just not for us. It's just missing something. But it doesn't mean that it's a bad book. It's just not for you. And like I agree with you, like you were saying, no, like there unfortunately is this like perception that just because you say something's bad, like you're saying that it's bad for everyone, which isn't the case. Like I get very ACOTAR is one of those debated ones. Some people put it on the overrated TikTok book, some people eat it up. I think for me, like you were kind of mentioning about your 50 Shades of Grey, like for me it just came at me at such a point in my life. It was like I'll never be able to recreate that again. And if I didn't read it then and read it now, it probably wouldn't have the effect on me that it did. It was like, because it was the first, I'd never read anything like it. It just, at the time when I read it, like I just had my daughter, and like not like certainly wasn't having like any kind of postnatal depression, but definitely just in that like bit of a negative baby bubble. Like I needed, and that's why I started reading, because I was like, I need to start doing something. I can't be sitting up all night Googling and going down this rabbit hole of like newborn scariness. I'll never be able to recreate that again. And that's why, like you were saying about the 50 Shades of Grey, like some people don't like it, and that's okay. It probably isn't the best book in the world, but what it did to me emotionally, I'll never be able to recreate that again. And I don't fight with people on social media when they say it's bad, but I do get a bit upset because I really love it.
I had the exact same thing with Fourth Wing. So
what, you didn't like it? You did like it?
I absolutely loved it. But I am not a fantasy or romantasy girly. Ellie will know this. I really struggle with like the whole like world building and stuff like that. I'm more of a thriller, horror, dark romance, murder mystery, that type of vibe. One of my friends brought it for me. She was like, just read it. Just read it. You've got a day off. Just read the book. I read it within a sitting and I was like, what? And now it's this such popular book. And like, I mean, I've got 2 copies of it. I've got my normal one, and then I managed to get like a sprayed edge special edition of it. But the amount of people now that are like hating on it, and I'm like, I really like that book.
Yeah, but it doesn't. Yeah,
it like brought me into romantasy, and like I'd never thought I'd read anything romantasy, and now I've read Fourth Wing, Iron Flame, all of ACOTAR apart from Silver Flames, because that book intimidates me. It keeps staring at me from my shelf, and I'm like, you are way too big for my life.
I have a controversial opinion about ACOTAR, and I might just leave Silver Flames. It was my least favourite book in the series. Controversial opinion.
It's not our favourite, it's our second favourite. Wow.
So I think it's like for me, like, because the funny thing is I think the reason, so Joe doesn't read fantasy either, and I think the reason that you guys don't read fantasy as much is because fantasy, I think, is very similar to a slow burn romance, because you have to go through so much world building to get to the action. You have to like almost invest that time in, whereas Ellie and Jordan very much insta love. You want smut from the first page, like you want it all happening all at once, and I think that's the difference. Whereas with a fantasy, it's like a romance where you've got to wait for it to build.
I I do find it crazy though, the fact that I've said I'm intimidated by Silver Flames. Yeah, I'm currently reading an 800-page book, but it's on my Kindle, so it doesn't feel like it's an 800-page book because it's just on my Kindle. I can't see the end of it. So
yeah, but even though I like slow burn books, for me, I found Silver Flames too slow.
And then we like a lot.
Excellent.
Yeah, and a lot of the commentary we sometimes say, which is like probably the opposite, is we'll sometimes say, "Oh, they just banged way too soon. Like they just shagged. It was way too soon. I want you to have me like on my knees, yearning, burning, crawling across the floor before you even like kiss. You know." So like, and here's the thing. Like that's what I love is that we're all considered like smut readers, but are like what we want from smut is so subjective, and like you said, it often gets painted with one brush. But like the books, the 4 or the 5 of us, if you include George as well, like they would be so different, completely different, and what we all want from that smut is so different. We generally, you know, we like to work for it, whereas like we sometimes critique books for being too like wham bam, you know, like that, you know. Yeah, I just think it's so interesting that everybody has like such a different take on these books. I can't comment on the Silver Flames comment because we just love it so much.
I'll get round to it at some point after I've like gone through the rest of my TBR that I've currently got that's like slowly piling up, and like especially as well sort of being on social media and having sort of like your own book talk, your own like bookstagram and that type of thing, being on like street teams and stuff like that for authors. If like you get an advanced reader's copy and you're like, right, okay, I've got to stop whatever I'm reading and read this book now because I've got like a week to review it. So that it just keeps getting pushed further and further and further and further down the list. And now I'm like, will I ever get around to it? I need to get around to it because there's like another one coming, but like I just need to get back into that sort of like romantasy fantasy headspace, whereas like at the minute I just need something dark and dirty just to get me through the day. I mean, I did my fluff of the month, I did Daydream the other day and I had a great time, and now I mean I've got a dark revenge romance currently going on and there's some dark and dirty stuff happening in this book, and I'm like, normal people wouldn't read this. Yeah, I'm having a great time.
It's good to have palette cleansers. Like we so we've just recorded it's out now, our August Patreon. We both picked each other like dark monster romance, and we've never read monster romances before, and we picked a book for each other and then we talk about it on the Patreon. And we kind of picked them just to talk about them. We didn't really think we'd enjoy them, but we actually both really enjoyed them. Like, it's not that I don't know, I didn't think it would have as much plot as it did. Sam read a really popular one which is called
Morning Glory Milk and Farm.
Yeah,
and that had a lot more. That had a lot more plot than I was expecting. Like, just from like the cover and from what the book was about, I was like, oh, I know exactly where this is going. But when we spoke about it, I was like, B, there's so much plot, like so much happens, and like actually by the end I was like, oh, my heart. Like, I forgot that he was a monster. Like, I was just like, oh, I'm so happy for them.
Yeah.
So we recently recorded an episode where we did 2 unhinged books. We used to do our unhinged books at the end of an episode. We've now dedicated a full episode to just unhinged books because we get too carried away. But I read one. It was called Forked. He was a fork. Yet there was so much plot, and I rated it 4 stars. I had a great time reading it, and like both Ellie and George were so shocked. They were like, "You gave an unhinged book 4 stars?" I'm like, "Yes, because there was plot, and he wasn't a fork all of the time, but then he was, and I'm confused. Why was he cutlery?"
I find sometimes like the best books are the ones where you don't read the blurb. You just pick a random book, and this is where KU is excellent because you don't have to pay anything. You don't have to, fork out for something where you're like, not sure whether I'm going to like this or not. You can literally download something, and then you can just read something without reading the blurb. You just go, right, okay, I'll read that. I saw that as a recommendation somewhere. I'll read that. And then you're like, wait a minute. I've never read anything like this before, but this is excellent. And then that's how you expand your genres, I guess, isn't it? And like your horizons to what you like to read, because you just try something else. And that's what I love about it. KU is the best thing that's ever been invented, in my opinion.
Yeah, 100%. The two books that we picked for each other were on KU, weren't they?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was great. Like, mine was a 2-hour read. Yours was a little longer. Mine was about a tree that sometimes wasn't a tree. It was real freaky. Oh, it was so unhinged. In hindsight, we should have called that episode Unhinged as opposed to like monster romances, because when I was telling you about mine, it was fucking weird. Honestly, if anybody saw me reading that, they would actually think, are you well? Because
I was like,
it was so freaky.
I was like, that is a cult. Like what you've just described to me, because obviously B like gave me a roundabout plot. I was like, that's a cult. What you're telling me is they were a cult. It was strange.
It was great.
I love that.
Yeah, it was
Really
enjoyable.
we need to read.
Yeah, at this point, we've read that many like unhinged books that sort of like, I feel like I've expanded my reading repertoire just from the unhinged books that we've read. I've had balloons, I've had Tetris blocks, I've had forks, we've had marshmallows,
I've had rakes.
paper clips, the rake was one. And you know, like the Kool-Aid man.
Oh,
Like
that
just he was a jug of juice.
a legit jug of juice, and he had to keep filling himself up when he emptied.
From the fridge.
You know, the marshmallow one you referenced.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The author of the marshmallow one did another one about a French horn. Like a sentient French horn.
That's yours. You read the marshmallow one?
We need to read this.
Yeah, the French horn we would highly recommend. We didn't read it cover to cover. It was on a live and we were just like finding quotes, but like would highly recommend.
Okay. The main character who owns the French horn is called Melody, and it's so funny.
That's great. Yeah. I didn't know for like the last kind of like segment if we wanted to go round really quickly and maybe just pick out like 3 books from not say childhood, but just like if you had to give 3 books that were like you on paper, your bookish origins like made and built you. Don't have to be from childhood, they could be from like 2 months ago. What would they be?
Oh, I think I know mine.
Oh.
Do you want to start?
Yeah,
I
think mine would be Eragon, because I remember sitting. I didn't have TV when I was growing up, so all I did was read. And I remember sitting between the 2 trees in the hammock reading Eragon for days, and I just literally absorbed it. I'd say My Sister's Keeper, because that was the start of my Jodie Picoult journey, and I think I've got every single book that she's ever written. And then I would say my third one is 50 Shades of Grey, for the intro to Smut years ago that I kind of took a little hiatus from. So I think that they're my 3.
Stunning.
For mine, I think it'd probably be The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. That was sort of my deep teenage years, and like sort of just before I'd stopped reading. A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. That series kicked up my reading again, and I think I'm planning on like rereading it soon, just because I haven't read it in a while, and I'm like, yeah, I'll give it a go again. And then probably like That Sick Love by Jessie Hall, just because that's one of the first sort of like darker books, other than like Haunting and Hunting. It was probably one of the darker books where I was like, yeah, I should probably search for something with more triggers, because I thought that was quite light. And it just kicked me off into now I'm reading like erotic horrors and books where I like question myself when I read the triggers, and I'm like, am I going to enjoy this? Yeah, I'm going to enjoy this.
Yeah. Sam, have you got 3? Go on. I know you brought I know you're desperate to show your paper copy. Go on. I know you've been waiting there twitching.
I don't know if you can see it. Yeah. This is actually my childhood book. You can see how yellow the pages have gone. So this, like, I think it's from like 1999. It's Enid Blyton's Faraway Tree Stories. So it's like a magical book about 3 children who go into the forest, and there's a magical tree, and if they climb to the top of the tree they get to go to all these different lands. And that was like my book as a child. It was the book I'd always pull off the bookshelf. I'd read it cover to cover. Like, it's ruined, it's disgusting, but that was like always like my childhood book, and if I think of reading in my childhood, that's the book that instantly comes to mind. When my nephew started reading, I bought him a more current version, but I bought it for him, and I was like, this is my favorite book as a child, I really want you to read it. So definitely Enid Blyton, Faraway Tree. Definitely Harry Potter, again, like that magical, whimsical element to it. Like I absolutely love it, and I will read it cover to cover every single year, like the whole series, including the play. Like I've read it all, and I just absolutely love it. And then I don't know about my third one. I suppose something that got me into fantasy, but I don't know what my favourite fantasy book is. Probably ACOTAR. I was going to say probably like the ACOTAR series is why I started reading fantasy. I was always like I said, a psychological thriller girl up until that point. And now I'm very deep in the romantasy. So yeah, probably ACOTAR for the romantasy element.
Excellent. My three are, the first one is a book. Well, it is a book. It's a collection of stories called The Mabinogion. So I don't know if you guys have heard of this. In Wales, they're like our fairy tales, basically. So you always study them in school, and they're not like, there's no original version of it. Like they're just word of mouth stories that multiple different people have like written down on paper. And obviously they've been there's versions are translated into English. That version is an English version. But like when I studied it in school, it's about like giants, dragons, like princesses, like King Arthur's in it, like, you know, Merlin's in it, Morrigan is in it, and it's all about Welsh. Yeah, like that's what the Fleetwood Mac song Rhiannon is named after. One of the goddesses is Rhiannon. And I just remember reading that as a child in school and being like, this is the coolest fucking thing I've ever read in my life. Like, and also like, this is really cheesy, but you know, because that's like our history, like that's just really, I don't know, that was just felt really cool. It was like, this is where I'm from, and this is like our history, and it's really cool. So I like reread this all the time, like when, particularly now as I write, like this is such a huge influence for me as a writer as well. And yeah, it's just such, and the actual stories that they're like very typical in terms like fairy tales, but it just, you know, in terms of fantasy, it just blew my brain, you know. So The Mabinogion will always be one. The second one, I did think about doing Harry Potter, but I was like, do you know what? No, nothing changed me more as a person than the little old book called Twilight. I like Sam, you can see how like disgusting this book is. This is my original copy. I don't know if there's any really sad little comments I've written in it. No, there isn't. But when I say, so I actually watched the film first. I watched the film and then I read the books, and like the chokehold that these books had me in. Like I read all the Twilight books. I read the novella, The Sad Short Life of Bree Tanner, whatever it's called. And then I also read The Host, which is like a standalone. They just had me in such a chokehold. I was like 14, 15, and it just changed my life. Sam knows this story, but when I was doing my GCSEs in school, I wanted to be a vampire so bad. And I was like 16. There was no excuse for me being like this. You know, Lush, the high street shop.
Oh, yeah.
At the time, they sold a body butter that had glitter in it. And I used to buy like 10 every time I went there. And every single day for school, I would cover myself head to toe in glitter body butter so I would sparkle like a vampire every single day.
That is the best.
I was 16.
I love it.
That is a mood.
I was such a try-hard loser, like such a loser. Like I wrote Wattpad fan fiction, like I was just in it. So I like Twilight just had me in, and it is crap, right? You know, as an adult looking back, like there's a really famous book talker, I can't remember the name of it, she picks apart the Twilight books. Like they're really problematic. Like I'm aware, like Stephanie Meyer is not a good person. But you know, just for like the time of my life, like chokehold, like nothing will ever change me like Twilight did. And then I'd have to say my third, like if I had to pick a recent one, it would have to be A Court of Mist and Fury. Although ACOTAR was like the first book in that series, and I obviously liked it enough to keep reading. We always say this, but like what A Court of Mist and Fury is a book, like I just can't put into words what that book does for me. Like I just can't. I'll never ever read a book like it ever again. As good as Silver Flames is, there will never be a fantasy book that does it like ACOTAR does it for me. I could cry thinking about it sometimes. That's really sad. But if I think about that book too much, I'll just start crying.
We've recently done an episode like that, and we were like mid-filming, and I'm like reading out a quote, and I'm like in tears reading out this quote, because like during reading the book, I had to stop reading because I couldn't see my Kindle because I was crying that hard. That's the type of like emotional level that I got
I'm
to.
so jealous.
But like,
I just
so,
want to cry.
you know, when you're talking about Twilight and being sort of like vampires and that sort of thing, I have just remembered a series that had an absolute chokehold on me when I was a teenager. It was called the House of Night series, and it had like, I think it was like Marked and something else, and they all had like, it was basically like smutty vampires but YA, and like this series had a chokehold on me, and it comes back every now and again as sort of like vivid flashes in my memory, and I'm like, yeah, I do remember that book. And it was like a full series, and I remember posting a TikTok about it. I think it was, you know, the Taylor Swift one where it's like, you wouldn't last an hour in the asylum that they made me, and I did that series, and everyone was like, you have just unlocked memories that I forgot that I had.
Like a fever dream, yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. But I'm really bad. See, I have really bad book amnesia, like really bad.
I do. We literally, like, not often. So most of the time when we do a book, I've read it previously, like a few years ago, and Sam's catching up. But sometimes, like, we both will read a book at the same time, and there's like a massive plot twist at the end, and I'm like, don't remember that. She's like, it was literally last week. I'm like, I don't remember it.
Yeah. But you know, I really, really hate it because I wish I could sit here and be able to recount what happened in some of my favourite books, but I honestly can't. But then I'm like, if I go and reread them again, it probably won't ever be the same. So it's like, I really want to reread the ACOTAR series, but then I'm like, but do I? Because what if it doesn't live up to what I felt the first time?
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's hard, isn't it?
Yeah, I've been doing the pod that it's helped you actually remember books, because now you're actually having to tab stuff.
Yeah, and like I have to slow down, but like it's quite interesting because I was going to mention it before, but I was like, it's not really related. But you know, when you were talking about your UD degree and that like you just completely lost the love of reading because you were kind of like made to do it, we've had to change the format of our podcast because we found that. So just having to read a book a week for the podcast made us not want to read them anymore. And we were struggling so much with being able to, because at the time, especially for me as well, I applied for loads of ARCs, and because I was so new to it, they all came through at the same time, and I was like, I'm really overwhelmed. I don't feel like I can read what I want to read, and I wasn't enjoying it. And I think Ellie, you were the same, and Jordan ended up being the same. So now we've like really scaled it back, and we're doing like more talking episodes, or like, you know, we're being a lot more chill with it, where we're putting the unhinged ones in their own one, so that we've got something else, you know, an episode where we're not having to cram everything in, because I just completely lost the love for reading and doing the podcast just because I felt forced to it rather than it being something I wanted to talk about. So yeah, I completely related to that from a obviously different time, but So
no, we have like we've always like, I say we've always, for the first couple of episodes, we weren't doing a book a week really, were we? And most of the time it was Sam kind of catching up with me, but we definitely, like, that's another reason why we vary, because as fun, like when we did the Quicksilver one, right, that was like the most fun. We read it at the same time. It was a book that we would have read, like, regardless of the podcast. We both loved it. Like, that was the definition of like why we started doing this, because it was like exactly why we got to sit down, we got to talk about it, and then to flip it into Carly Hart was like a fever dream. It was like amazing. But then like another one was the Powerless series. We did it, and we didn't only do it because it was popular. We'd read it and we were like, maybe we do this, and we've both agreed, one, we're always going to try and vary our episodes. Like, that's why we don't do a book a week. We try and mix it up. If we've done like a series, we'll try and have a good break in between of doing non-book episodes. But also I don't know if you guys have ever done it, but talking about books that we didn't enjoy, I don't know what it was, like when we were doing Palace, we said this, we're going to finish the series because we started it, but we said this last week, didn't we, Sam? We're reckless, like, let's never do this again. Because
it's like horrible trying to fill time talking about something that you just didn't enjoy, like, and I don't want to poo-poo on the authors. Like, good for her. She's got a traditional contract. She's selling ridiculous amounts of copies. It just wasn't for us. And I hate sitting here having to, like, say that I didn't like it. Like, I feel bad. Like, that's not why we started this.
Because we're never going to make it up, are we? We're never going to, like, fib and say, we love this. Because we're never going to recommend something we don't love with everything. But also, like you said, we couldn't sit there. We didn't, like, I'd like to think we didn't completely shit on it. But it was just really hard to do that.
We've had a book, so we planned to read The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker, is it? Which I'd seen recommended on Book Talk loads, like, years ago when I first started reading, and so it had been on my TBR for ages. I had a physical copy, Jord had a physical copy, and we were kind of like, we want to throw some fluffy romances in there to kind of break up our dark ones. So both Ellie and Jord were ahead of me reading for the podcast, and they both started and went, you're like, what, 10, 20 pages in? You're like, I absolutely hate this book.
Yeah, I think I was 8 pages into the book, and I was like, I cannot read this book. I am forcing myself to read this book, and I already know that I'm going to sit there and I'm going to end up shitting on the book for a whole episode. And, like, we'd filmed one before where we all had the arc. None of us enjoyed the arc. We were like, oh yeah, no, we'll do it on the podcast. We filmed it, and I was like, I can't post this episode because it was a lot of just us being like, it was good. Yeah, really, really liked it. And you could just tell the fact that none of us actually enjoyed the book. And it's like, I'm not going to post it because then we look like shit because we didn't enjoy it. And it just looks like we're shitting on them. So really,
it's not that we're scared to say that we don't like it. Yeah, it's that. It's that, yeah, we didn't like it, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't read it, because if it sounds interesting to you as a reader, then read it, give it a go.
Yeah.
And I think that's the really hard part. It's like, you don't necessarily want to always have a positive view of everything, because you don't love everything that you read, but also you don't want to sit there for an hour and be like, yeah, so don't read this. Because that's just weird. So yeah, that's kind of hard for us. But I find that I enjoy filming episodes less when they're books that I'm not that bothered about.
Yeah.
So it is the case, and you want to love what you're doing, don't you, as well? Like, you don't want to sit there and talk about something that you're just not enjoying.
It's like we started it as something fun to do, and then you don't want it to become a chore, and you can tell when sort of like energy's down, no one likes the book, we're all just sort of sat there like miserable, and it's like, this isn't what we want for it. You want people to sit there and feel like you're having a conversation with like your mates and you're just talking about a book, instead of being it like, I just didn't really like it, like.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like that's a really good segue into our next episode, which we're going to plug here. But our episodes with you guys, so we're going to do a flip over now, is we're going to be talking about what it's like to have a bookish podcast, I guess. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, I know. Thanks, guys. This has been really fun.
So much fun. I love doing episodes like this.
It's nice to talk to somebody else that does a podcast, because I get too overwhelmed with all the social stuff. So Ellie does it all. So I know that we're in like the podcast thingy majig that I have nothing to do with. As I just get to, second I start getting a lot of notifications, I'm like, nah, I can't deal with this. I'm sorry. But it's nice for me. I mean, Ellie, you've probably spoken to a lot more people that do podcasts, but like, it's nice to speak to people that also do it as well, and like see how you guys feel about it, because like I say, most of the time we just make it up as we go along. We don't know if we're doing it right.
We are flying by the string of our pants and hoping for the best.
Literally.
Literally.
So that was episode 29, our Bookish Origins with the wonderful Bookish Babes After Dark podcast. Thank you so much to Ellie and Eleanor for sitting down with us, and that episode was so much fun to record. We also did a collab with them over on their channel, but TBC when that's coming out, because I know those guys have got a lot of episodes prepped and ready to go. So I believe that episode isn't coming out until the end of September, and we were over on their channel talking about what it's like to have a bookish podcast, basically, and the ins and outs of what it's like to run a bookish podcast. I don't think that episode's coming out, like I said, until around the end of September. So when you're listening to this, probably not out yet, but go ahead and like subscribe to them on Spotify, on all the podcasting platforms that they're on, and obviously you'll be notified when that episode with us comes out. So like I said, huge thank you to those guys. This episode was so much fun. And next week, join us for another one of these sort of like collab episodes that we're doing with other bookish creators, I guess. We mentioned this a few times before on our lives, but we are sitting down with the wonderful Bookish Dad Reads. For those of you who have heard of him, I'm sure a lot of you have. He's an amazing social media creator, content creator on BookTok, on Bookstagram, just makes the funniest videos and also does a lot of really heartfelt videos talking about, you know, struggles with mental health, all those things. So it's kind of a bit more, you know, fun/serious episode next week, but we're so excited to sit down with him. We hope you enjoyed this episode and we'll see you next week.
Thanks so much for listening.
Follow us on TikTok and Instagram at A Pod of Smut and Wingspan.
See you next week.
Bye.